On January 24, 41 AD, the most powerful man in the Western world was stabbed 30 times while watching a theatrical performance in Rome. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but all of Rome knew him by the nickname his own soldiers gave him as a child, Caligula, Little Boots. He was only 28 years old. In just 1,394 days in power, this young emperor had transformed the heart of Western civilization into a palace of terror, perversion, and absolute megalomania. Senators murdered for sport. Feasts where servants were executed at the table. A horse-appointed consul of the Republic. And a man who genuinely believed himself to be a living god. This is the story that history books long hesitated to tell in full. To understand Caligula, one must first understand Rome at the beginning of the 1st century AD. The Roman Empire was the greatest power in the known world, controlling territories from Britain to Egypt, from the Iberian Peninsula to Mesopotamia, roughly 5 million square kilometers and an estimated population of 70 million people. Rome had endured turbulent decades. The brutal dictatorship of Emperor Tiberius, who ruled from 14 to 37 AD, had left the capital in a constant climate of fear. Tiberius executed dozens of senators through the so-called treason laws. Any word, any whisper could mean death. When Tiberius died in March 37 AD, Rome breathed a sigh of relief and placed all its hopes in his young 24-year-old successor, grandson of the beloved general Germanicus. The Roman people would bitterly regret that hope. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus was born on August 31, 12 AD, in Antium, a coastal city south of Rome. His father was Germanicus Caesar, the most popular and beloved general in Rome, victor of decisive campaigns in Germania, adored by soldiers and people alike. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, was the granddaughter of Emperor Augustus himself. In other words, Caligula was born into the highest Roman aristocracy, with imperial blood running through his veins. Still a baby, he was taken by his parents on military campaigns along the Rhine, where soldiers adored him and sewed miniature legionnaire uniforms for him, boots included, the famous Caligula, that would give him his nickname. It was a childhood destined for greatness. But tragedy would come far too soon. Caligula's childhood was marked by a series of tragedies that would irreparably shape his psychology. In 19 AD, when he was only 7 years old, his father Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances in Syria, possibly poisoned at the order of Emperor Tiberius himself, who saw him as a rival. His mother Agrippina was exiled and starved to death in prison in 33 AD. Two of his older brothers, Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar, were also imprisoned and executed by Tiberius between 30 and 33 AD. Caligula spent his adolescence under the permanent shadow of death, forced to smile at the man who had destroyed his family. The historian Suetonius wrote that there was never a better slave for a master, nor a worse master for a slave, than Caligula was for Tiberius. This was the young man Rome would acclaim emperor in March 37. The first 7 months of Caligula's reign were, by all historical accounts, extraordinarily promising. He was 24 years old when he assumed power on March 16, 37 AD, receiving the title of emperor by acclamation from the Roman Senate. He immediately took popular measures. He freed political prisoners unjustly imprisoned by Tiberius, publicly burned the archives of treason trials, reintroduced elections for public offices, and summoned athletes and gladiators from across the empire for grand games. In just 3 months, he spent the enormous inheritance accumulated by Tiberius, estimated at 2.7 billion sesterces, on donations to the people and soldiers. The Senate exulted. The people called him Son of the Stars. But in October 37 AD, something changed drastically. Caligula fell gravely ill, bedridden for weeks. The man who emerged from that illness was no longer the same. Who was Caligula really? The ancient historians, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Philo of Alexandria, paint a disturbing portrait. Physically, he was tall and pale, with sunken eyes and an expression that shifted rapidly from charm to terror. He was extraordinarily intelligent and a brilliant orator, qualities that made his cruelty all the more calculated. He had a peculiar sadistic sense of humor. He reportedly laughed openly during executions and stated with pleasure that nothing in the world pleased him more than witnessing suffering. But modern historians debate intensely how much of these stories is political exaggeration. The fact is that Caligula ruled at a time when the Roman Senate had every interest in demonizing emperors who reduced their power. The historical truth probably lies somewhere between the monster of ancient accounts and a simply cruel and unstable ruler. Around Caligula orbited equally complex figures. His closest advisor and uncle was Claudius, whom he frequently humiliated publicly, making him trip and serve as a figure of ridicule at court, the very same Claudius who, by ironic fate, would succeed him as emperor. Macro, prefect of the Praetorian Guard who had helped Caligula rise to power, was forced to commit suicide in 38 AD after their alliance dissolved. His three sisters, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla, reportedly had incestuous relations with him according to ancient sources, with Drusilla being his favorite, whose death in 38 AD devastated him. In the Senate, a faction of nobles was growing who tolerated the emperor only while fear contained them. There was also Herod Agrippa, king of Judea and personal friend, one of the few who maintained a genuine relationship with Caligula outside the court of terror. The definitive turning point came in autumn 37 AD. After weeks bedridden with high fever and delirium, Caligula emerged transformed. His first major measure was to order the execution of Gemellus, his co-testamentary heir and Tiberius's adopted grandson, in 38 AD, a young man who had cared for him during his illness. Next, he ordered Macro's suicide. In 39 AD, he discovered or invented a senatorial conspiracy and executed or exiled dozens of aristocrats. In September 39 AD, he led a bizarre military campaign in Gaul and on the coast of Britain, where, according to historical accounts, he ordered his soldiers to collect seashells from the sea as spoils of war against Neptune. Any criticism or joke about him became a capital crime. What the Romans would call the Years of Terror had begun. The years 39 and 40 AD represent the apex of horror in Caligula's reign. According to Suetonius and Cassius Dio, he ordered family members of executed persons to witness the deaths, then be invited to dinners where they were forced to feign joy. He demanded that senators run on foot alongside his litter for miles while he traveled. He ordered brothels reopened inside the imperial palace itself. And most shocking, he officially declared himself a living god, ordering the heads of statues of deities such as Jupiter and Augustus removed and replaced with copies of his own face. In Alexandria, Egypt, in 38 AD, he allowed a Roman mob to attack and massacre Jews in the greatest pogrom of pre-Christian antiquity. The philosopher Philo of Alexandria, a survivor, personally documented the horrors. How did Rome react to Caligula's growing terror? With a combination of paralyzing fear, resignation, and clandestine resistance. The Senate, a body of about 600 powerful men, had been completely tamed. Any senator who showed resistance was accused of treason, a crime punishable by death and confiscation of all family property. A terrible example was the case of former consul Gnaeus Domitius Afer, who dared criticize the emperor in public in 39 AD and was forced to make a servile public eulogy of Caligula himself to save his life. Among the common people, the situation was more ambiguous. Games and food distributions created genuine popularity, but the fear of random denunciations kept everyone silent. Only the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal protectors, had real power to act, and they were beginning to lose patience. The consequences of Caligula's rule were devastating on multiple dimensions. Economically, he practically emptied the imperial treasury in less than 2 years. The 2.7 billion sesterces left by Tiberius had evaporated by 38 AD. To replenish the coffers, he began fabricating treason accusations against wealthy citizens, confiscating their fortunes. Historical estimates suggest at least 40 senators and over 200 equestrians were executed in 4 years. The provinces suffered under extortionate taxes invented by the emperor, a tribute on table carriers, a tax on prostitutes equivalent to 1 session per day, taxes on legal proceedings. Trade throughout the Mediterranean suffered severe disruptions. By 40 AD, Rome was already on the brink of administrative chaos, with provincial governors operating semi-autonomously due to lack of coherent directives from the center of power. Behind the statistics were human stories of profound tragedy. General Lepidus, the emperor's brother-in-law and court favorite, was executed in 39 AD after a revealed conspiracy, real or fabricated. The emperor's sisters, Agrippina and Livilla, were exiled to the barren Pontine Islands, forced to carry the ashes of the condemned in their own hands. In Judea and Egypt, Jewish communities suffered systematic persecution. In Alexandria, the philosopher Philo led a desperate delegation to Rome in 39 to 40 AD to plead for mercy, and was ignored while the emperor played with other matters. But there were survivors who would keep the memory alive. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, survived the exile ordered by Caligula. And there was Uncle Claudius, the court idiot, who laughed along with the humiliators, and who watched everything with eyes far sharper than they appeared. The conspiracy that eliminated Caligula was carefully planned over months in 40 AD. Its leader was Cassius Dio, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, a veteran officer whom Caligula had repeatedly humiliated, calling him obscene names and forcing him to use passwords like Venus and Priapus for the guard. Dio had recruited fellow guard officers, Cornelius Sabinus among them, as well as conspiratorial senators. The plan was simple: wait for an opportunity during the Palatine Games of January 41. On January 24, as Caligula descended from a theater to have lunch, Dio approached him and said, "Give me the password." Caligula responded with his usual provocation. Then Dio drew his sword and dealt the first blow, to the groin. The other conspirators attacked. The emperor received 30 stab wounds and died there, aged 28, after just 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days of reign. Caligula's death created an immediate and chaotic power vacuum. The Senate met in panic and debated the restoration of the Republic, a possibility that the more idealistic senators had cherished for decades. But the Praetorian Guard acted with brutal speed. Within hours, they found Uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain in the palace, according to Suetonius's famous account, trembling with fear, and acclaimed him emperor, thereby securing their own position of power. The Senate, without military support, surrendered to the fait accompli. Assassins Dio and Sabinus were eventually executed by Claudius as protocol, though the new emperor clearly sympathized with them. Caligula's memory was subject to damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, his portraits destroyed, his name erased from public inscriptions. As if Rome were trying to erase a collective shame. History recorded Caligula primarily through the works of 3 ancient authors who wrote decades after his death. Suetonius, writing around 121 AD, dedicated an entire chapter of his work, The Lives of the 12 Caesars, to compiling the emperor's atrocities in detail bordering on sensationalism. Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century, was equally severe. Philo of Alexandria provided the only contemporary account from someone who actually interacted with Caligula, and it was devastatingly negative. But modern historians like Anthony Barrett, author of the 1989 biography, Caligula, The Corruption of Power, argue that ancient authors had strong political motivations to exaggerate. The fact is that Caligula ruled at a time when selective destruction of evidence was official policy. The horse consul, for example, Incitatus, was probably never actually appointed to the office. All indications suggest Caligula merely threatened to do so to humiliate the Senate. The impact of Caligula's reign on Rome was profound and lasting on multiple dimensions. Institutionally, it demonstrated irreversibly that the system created by Augustus, where the Senate maintained the appearance of power while the emperor held actual authority, was fundamentally unstable when a psychologically unbalanced ruler took the throne. This lesson would lead the Romans to develop more sophisticated mechanisms of control over emperors. The Principate would never function quite the same way again. Militarily, the Praetorian Guard had proven itself to be Rome's true kingmaker, not the Senate, not the people, not the legions on the frontiers. The following centuries would see the Guard make and unmake emperors repeatedly. And culturally, the name Caligula became a universal synonym for absolute tyranny and the corruption of power, a reference used by historians, philosophers, and political thinkers for 2,000 years. Caligula's story resonates with disturbing modernity. The psychologist and historian Daniel Ogden, in recent studies, notes that the behavioral pattern described by ancient historians, megalomania, impulsive cruelty, manipulation and deliberate humiliation of subordinates, progressive isolation from reality, has identifiable clinical parallels with personality disorders we now understand better. More importantly, Caligula's trajectory is a case study in how absolute power without institutional checks can corrode not only the ruler, but the entire structure around them. Political philosophers from Montesquieu to Hannah Arendt have cited Rome, and specifically emperors like Caligula, when arguing for the necessity of separation of powers, independent institutions, and accountability mechanisms. When we observe today's leaders who seek to concentrate unlimited power in themselves, the shadow of Caligula still looms as a warning. Caligula's legacy is complex and goes far beyond the horror stories. He was the product of a system that concentrated absolute power in the hands of a single human being, and showed us, in a brutal and unforgettable way, what happens when that human being is unbalanced. But he was also the product of a childhood destroyed by the same violence he would later inflict. The boy who lost his father, watched his mother die in prison, and saw two brothers executed, and who had to smile at the murderer of his family for years, that boy paid a price that shaped the monster Rome created. That is not absolution. It is understanding. And understanding is the only tool we have against the repetition of history. 2,000 years later, the lessons of Caligula remain urgent: power without restraint corrupts. Institutions matter. And the humanity of a leader is a far more reliable guarantee of peace than any army. If you made it this far, thank you for exploring this dark page of history with us. Like the video, subscribe to the Dark History channel, and ring the bell so you never miss the next stories that time nearly erased.